Okay, so Michael, it's great to see you again.
Great to be here.
Michael dropped by today, and we thought that we would have a discussion about his experiences in China. So I'm just going to let Michael introduce himself, and we'll go from there.
All right. Well, I'm Michael P. Toothman. I'm an educator, a public speaker, a writer, and an expert on project management. For the last 4 years, my passion has been China. I'm very active in Chinese social media, where I'm considered a key opinion leader. And I work with companies in China to facilitate the communication between them and the West for business needs. Using simple business tools such as project management, agile, lean thinking, but also really focusing on cross-cultural communication, which is why I'm glad to be talking with you today.
Yeah, so let's start a little bit at the beginning. You said you've obviously been doing project management for most of your professional life.
18 years.
18 years. When did China enter the picture of your professional life? You said 4 years ago.
Yeah, about 5 years ago, I started getting more and more students from mainland China. And I realized I had to connect with them in a different way. Because, just the normal American style of education is very, very different from the Chinese style.
Yes.
And I see other instructors where they would just, do it their typical way, and they would kind of leave the students behind. Mm-hmm. And I wanted my Chinese students to be just as engaged in my courses as the Americans. And so it's been a great educational experience for me because by reaching them, I've made the class better for everyone.
Now, how long have you been teaching?
15 years. In fact, I'm getting ready to start my 15th year at University of California, Riverside.
Wow, 15 years. But it was only 5 years ago that you started having more Chinese students, or it's only 5 years ago that you started discovering they had different needs to help enhance the class?
About 2008, I started getting 1 or 2 Chinese students.
Okay.
But my university has been having over the years a major push in bringing in students from mainland China. And so now I typically have 10 to 12. Some of my classes are almost 50% mainland Chinese students.
Now, you said UC Riverside made a push to bring in more Chinese students? Because my understanding is that Chinese students are always looking for opportunities to come to America for higher education. And it's almost like if you're willing to accept them, they'll come.
Yes. I think they're a great asset. I really enjoy their perspective and the way they look at the world. And, I do a lot of things in my classes to further the cross-cultural communication.
Okay.
For example, when I first started teaching with a large number of Chinese students, they would typically sit in the back of the room. They have their laptops up, and they'd be on WeChat, and they would speak Chinese, and they wouldn't meet anyone. But now in my classes, all my classes, it's a requirement to sit with somebody different every single time, and you're not allowed to sit with anybody from your home country. Okay. And so what happens is my students are all meeting Western students, they're meeting business people, making strong connections, developing their LinkedIn accounts a little bit, learning more about Americans, and Americans are kind of getting out of their little comfort zone and learning about China.
Now, this is not a UC Riverside policy.
No, that's a Michael P. Toothman
policy. That's something that you and when did you start doing that?
I started doing that about 3 years ago, and it's been great success. Because like I said, you'd walk into a classroom and you'd have all these little fiefdoms. You'd have the Chinese sitting in the back with their laptops, and you have the Germans over here, the French were over there, the Americans are filtered in the back, like all good Americans, sit in the back and relax and get on your phone and do your email. I just wasn't having that. That was no way to run a classroom. So everybody is required to meet somebody new, add to their contacts, and I've really ramped it up over the last year or two. We're all wandering through class and say, tell me about your classmate here. Mm. So now they have to actually talk to each other and share a little bit about their lives. And it's been fantastic. My Chinese students have really, really gravitated toward that, and they still communicate with a lot of their American classmates.
Now it sounds like there's a lot of international students at UC Riverside.
Depending on the class that I'm teaching, I may have 50 to 60% international students, and depending on the quarter. fall quarter is about to start, and this is our biggest quarter for international students.
Okay, and what are the courses that you mainly teach?
I teach project management courses. I teach leadership courses. In fact, my leadership classes are probably my magnum opus class. This is really where I get the most people, and it's a transformational experience for all the students, not just the Chinese. It's how I run the class and what I teach is typically different than the HR-centered leadership classes we've all taken. Compliance and how to have a good meeting, communication, things like that. I teach a different curriculum.
Okay, and the classes that you teach, they're part of the business school at?
It's part of, my focus is on project management, so it's all part of our specialized certificate program in project management.
Okay, and then the leadership, how about the leadership course?
Leadership is part of that, but it's also, I have, my leadership class, my introduction to project management is an elective for most of the other certificate programs. And so I have a lot of people who, they're taking it because it was part of their curriculum, and they fall in love with leadership, and they fall in love with international project management, which is kind of my plan.
Okay. Is there such a course as international project management or kind of global project management, or is project management kind of just more you have to get PMP certified and you just have to learn project management?
Well, project management by definition is really international. It's just, some people think it's sort of arcane science, but in reality it's just the science of execution.
Right.
And, we have so many business leaders in this world, both on the Chinese side and the American side, who are excellent planners, but they can't take their plan to fruition. And that's why you need project managers, because we convert strategy into action. Mm-hmm. And so what I teach really is international project management, because you're trying to understand the culture of your company and the culture of your customer and the culture of your country. Right. All those weigh into how you can execute more effectively.
Okay. So let's get back more specifically to, so you have a lot of international students, but it sounds like you were really kind of driven or motivated by the way that the Chinese students typically kind of congregated or grouped together or didn't participate, that you even kind of really wanted to do something more to help that group of students, like
right.
As opposed to saying the students from Germany.
Well, the students from Germany, it's a different educational culture. In China, you don't have a lot of classroom interaction with the instructor.
Right.
It's typically one-way communication. You sit there and you absorb the information.
Right.
And I'm very big in collaboration. I want to know what people think. And in fact, after the first class, I always have a meeting with the Chinese students, say, hey, I'm kind of different than you're used to. I want to hear your thoughts and opinions. I will never, out of respect, I'll never just walk up and ask you in the middle of class. I'll ask the Americans first and then give you time to come up with your answer, your feedback, and do it that way. We do a lot of case studies, and I tell them that at least one case study, you're going to lead the case study. So
that's really interesting. So I want to dig a little bit deeper in that. So now, when you at the end of the class, do you gather the Chinese students separately with the rest of the class population?
After the first class, I bring in all the international students.
Okay.
Let them know my expectations and why this is a little bit different than they're used to.
Okay, but you don't separate the Chinese students from the other international.
I do after I said I'd like to talk to Chinese students.
Okay.
But I do that just to add them on my WeChat.
Okay.
The fact that I'm adding them on WeChat and I'm showing them my Weibo, it seems to give them a little bit of credibility to at least understand their culture.
Okay.
And I think that starts us off on a really good foot.
No, absolutely. When they see that an American professor is on WeChat and has a Weibo following, they're pleasantly surprised.
And I have more followers than they do.
Yeah.
Right. So it always, and a lot of times they'll send me messages saying, I'm really excited about your class, and it's because we've made a connection.
Yeah.
That I do understand their culture and understand where they're coming from, and I've oriented the class so that they can succeed. They're not just pedestrian bystanders in this educational play that I'm doing with the Americans. They are actually part of the experience.
Yeah, I want to dig deeper because one of the things that you just mentioned is, so obviously this is a classroom setting, so In Chinese culture, you're the professor, so at a hierarchical level,
Right.
you are obviously to be given the maximum amount of respect. But one of the things that business leaders are frustrated with in China, and I hear this from a lot of people, is that they don't feel they can convince the Chinese people to share their opinion. And basically, in a classroom setting, maybe it's different. I wanted you to talk about how willing you think the Chinese students actually are to share their opinion, tell you what they thought of the class. How honest do you think they are when they're providing, or are they just providing you, giving you face by saying, "Oh, we loved the class, it was great," and how has the way that they opened up to you changed over the course of the last 3 years? I'm assuming that the first time that you did it, say, "Tell me what you thought," they weren't as receptive as maybe after you've kind of softened your approach or changed how you do things.
Well, how my approach has changed as I've learned more about Chinese culture. In the beginning, it was, I want you to talk, I want you to be part of the class.
And that didn't work.
And that didn't work. The laptops went up and everybody was on WeChat.
Yeah.
But once I learned more about the culture, and I learned about, when I meet with them now, I learned where they come from. If students were Guangdong province, then typically they've seen more foreigners. They had more of an intercultural experience, more than maybe from one of the northern provinces. So I want to find out where they're from, and then by proving to them that I understand their culture, by having my following on WeChat and Weibo, they start to trust me a little bit more. But I'm as good as my word. I don't put them on the spot. Sometimes I'll see them in the hall before class, say, "Hey, I'm going to be talking about this today. Hopefully you'll contribute." Mm-hmm. And it's just a level of trust you got to build, just like in business.
Yeah.
You can read a book about China as a businessman and walk into a meeting, but it doesn't mean anybody's going to trust you. You have to be, have a high degree of empathy,
right,
to understand, why is this student here? Mm-hmm. Is this student here because they were passionate about coming to America and learning about this topic? Mm-hmm. Or are they here because their parents were passionate about them going to America to have this on their resume?
Right.
And so I need to meet them at their needs. And that's really important, having this empathy to understand, what's their plight. They've been in numerous classes all day. How can I reach out to them?
Yeah, I think you just connected two really important concepts that I just want to highlight again for all the listeners. Obviously, empathy is really important in any multicultural environment, but for Americans dealing with Chinese, developing that level of empathy is really important to understand what they value and what they care about and why they're here. But you made another really, really important point, because a lot of people will ask, well, how do you develop empathy? And you actually answered that question, in my opinion. You have to be curious. And you just mentioned, I just loved how you were just mentioning how you're curious about them, where they're from. You ask them a lot of questions, and that has to be sincere. You can't just do it for, just saying, okay, I need to pretend to be curious. You're genuinely curious, and I think that's helped you develop what we would call a closer level of Guanxi with these Chinese students.
And I do this to all my students because I actually run a Facebook group for my students. And I know a lot of instructors have done this, and they, accumulate 14 or 15 students over time. I have students in my group from 2004, from the very first class I ever taught at UC Riverside. Mm-hmm. And the fact that all these students still want to come along for the ride with me after all these years, it's very gratifying and very humbling.
Yeah, now your Facebook group is for all your students, not just the Chinese students.
Right.
Okay. Now, do you have separate groups for Chinese students? Because I know you do.
I'm actually getting ready to launch a WeChat group for my students, because I now have accumulated over the years enough Chinese students to make it worthwhile, and so they can renew their connections with me and with each other. I think they'll be very valuable.
Okay. So yeah, you've obviously really passionate about not working just with your Chinese students, but with all of your students.
Yes.
Engaging with all of them. But now you're starting to engage with a lot of projects related to China.
Right.
Is that driven more by opportunity or by your own kind of interest and passion in China?
It's been both, because I am an expert on project management, and right now with the economy in China and the growth in places like Shenzhen and Shanghai, project management is probably the superpower that Chinese business people need right now.
Mm-hmm.
Is this ability to take your plans and to execute them effectively, and adherence to schedule and scope and such, but also to be able to meet the customer's needs and provide value. And that's what all project management is providing value.
Mm-hmm. And what about the opportunities now in China? Are you, I think you mentioned, when we were just chatting, that you have this opportunity to go to China to teach.
Yes, we're working on a new program that I think is going to be very promising. But I've worked with several companies in China and helped them, understand American business, because there's always seems to be this disconnect when Chinese and American companies try to collaborate.
Mm-hmm.
Lack of understanding of the culture and cross-cultural communication and such in the business environments. And I really try to facilitate the conversation so that both sides can get a lot of value out of this.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about that. So, when you help do that, and obviously you've developed a lot of experience doing that, working with so many international students and Chinese students and engaging with them and engaging with Chinese companies. How much of that falls outside of project management and more into just business communications or business negotiations?
I do have to bring in a lot of cross-cultural communication, understanding the culture, leadership. What's the difference between Chinese leadership and American leadership? Who are the right people to talk to? I crawl through their processes and to make sure I can find any areas that need to be addressed that maybe cause difficulty between the two groups. So there's a lot of project management, but also a lot of the thought process. Looking at the project from the 30,000-foot mark and saying, okay, what kind of cultural things are at play here? Who are the key opinion leaders? What are the constituencies? Who are the stakeholders? Who are impacted? How do we get them on board today and not wait till the end? Those things.
Yeah. Now, as far as the curriculum of the courses that you teach, now, how much are you responsible for actually developing or designing the curriculum?
I wrote every class.
You wrote every class.
I wrote every class, and I can teach every class. Now, we have a really good selection of teachers now that teach in our program.
But you actually developed all of the course materials.
I wrote the syllabi for every course.
Okay. So obviously the way that you incorporated a lot of these international project manager or cross-cultural elements in, that's probably more of what you see as important.
Yeah, I wanted all the classes to be to work well together, to kind of dovetail with each other.
Right.
I didn't want a program to where you get this style of project management taught, and then this style taught, and this style taught, and students get out with their certificate and go, well, how do I get all this to work together? So luckily, we have a really good staff, with really good teachers at UC Riverside, where we talk with each other and we have the classes kind of work together.
Mm.
So you walk out with your certificate, but you understand how all the different pieces work.
Now, are they getting a project management certificate?
Yes.
Okay.
Specialized certificate and a professional certificate rather than project management.
Oh, okay. And how long does that generally take?
2 quarters, actually.
2 quarters?
If you're taking 3 quarters, taking 3 classes a quarter, you can get it done in 2 quarters.
Okay. And then, so basically, the students that are coming over from China, they're coming specifically for this certificate in project management.
Many of them are, yes.
Many of them are, okay. So let's talk a little bit of just more about your own kind of, obviously you've been thinking about it and you're passionate about this, but what, in your opinion, are the biggest differences between the Chinese culture and the Chinese mindset compared to like American students or German students? Or let's just not make it even students. Let's just make it people.
Well, you mentioned it earlier about, when they walk in the door, I'm the professor, I'm up here and they're down here. Where with American students, yeah, I may be the teacher, but they don't put me as high as a plane as the Chinese would. So there's a little bit more equality in the relationship. And that's why I'm really trying to drive with my Chinese students, is let them realize that, yes, I'm in this role right now as teacher, but I'm accountable to them for the educational experience.
Right.
And they're accountable to me about doing their best and getting as much out of this as possible.
Right.
And I think that really helps overcome the cultural element where, big me, little student kind of thing. I don't want that at all. I want there to be more of me as being a mentor. And that's how I look at myself as a teacher. I'm really just a mentor. I've done it. I've been there. Let me teach you how not to make the same mistakes I did in my career.
Right. How many Chinese students would you estimate that you've taught over the last 15 or how many years?
Probably 300 or 400.
300 or 400. Now, can you recall any instances where you kind of maybe had a confrontation or a disagreement or even an argument with a Chinese student? Has that ever happened?
No, it has never happened.
It has never happened.
I am sure there's been situations they were been upset with me, but they would never really articulate that. So I have to, be very, very watchful of when I'm talking that I'm not losing somebody, or if somebody is upset with me. And that's why it's so great to have WeChat, because if I feel like a student didn't get something, or we had a breakdown in communication, I could always WeChat them later that evening, and they'll actually engage with me. WeChat's been a very, very good tool in that regard. So we can have sort of an off-channel communication. And because, they're very, very seldom, but, there's sometimes I feel like I didn't explain it well to them, and I need to go back and explain it again.
That's, wow, over 300 students, and you've never had like a more contentious engagement with any of them?
No, not really.
Okay.
I'm very blessed in that. Now, there's been some challenges.
Okay.
For example,
talk about that.
So, for example, in China, education, homework is a lot more collaborative. In America, homework is very individual. Gene, you do your homework and you put your name at the top, and it's your work, and I don't want you to plagiarize, and I'm going to be putting it through a plagiarism checker to make sure you didn't pilfer it from Wikipedia, and you're doing your own original work. But in China, it's very acceptable for groups of people to put together the work, and then they all turn in the same thing. So that's always a challenge.
So that's happened.
Yeah. Oh, yes. I was starting to get groups, and they would hand me, the same work, and I'm thinking, well, they're not even being artful about disguising it from me. But instead of just giving them an F, I went and chatted with them. Oh, professor, in our classes back at our university, this is what we do. And I did a little checking and talked to some Chinese scholars at the university. And indeed, that's exactly what they do. So now I tell them, in the beginning, I know you're used to collaborating, but I want to see your original work, because I want to see how you think and how you would apply what you know to this assignment. So it's worked out a lot better that way.
Okay, so you're getting less of that.
Yes.
Or at least they're being more artful about it, if they are.
Possibly, but I think a lot of times when you turn them loose, when you say, look, I want to know what your perspective is, not your school's, your classmates. And I do several assignments like that. I do discussion assignments where they have to give me original work. It's really worked out well, because they get to use their English writing ability, which is very, very strong, I found in China. And they have a very unique perspective. And in reading the discussion assignments from other students, they learn about the differences in the cultures. I think it's been very beneficial for them.
Yeah, so the students who come for the project manager certificate, do they also have to pass like the TOEFL, the test of English as a foreign language?
Yes. You have to score high before you even get accepted at UC Riverside.
Okay, do they have to take like GRE or anything like that?
No, but they do have to score a certain number on the TOEFL.
Okay. Let me ask you this, because my father, he's retired now, but he was a professor of physics at Georgia State University.
Oh, okay.
I'm curious, have you ever had a student or a Chinese student come with you with a disagreement about a way that he or she was graded?
I've had students come to me and ask me why I graded a certain way.
Okay.
And being a project management class, it's not like grading an English composition,
Right.
where it's all very, very subjective, right?
Right.
I have a, I let them know in the beginning of the first class, this is how I grade things. This is what I'm looking for. And so there's not a lot of disagreement, mainly because everybody knows in advance what my criteria is going to be. Now, they may ask me how they can get better grades, how they can write it differently, and I'm happy to sit down and talk to them about that.
Okay, so that's, I really like the way that, I think there's a lot of lessons for people to learn in doing business, because your attitude and your approach really kind of opens the door and paves the way for people to engage with you more and be more collaborative.
I had to do this, Gene, because it was hurting them.
Yeah.
Because this is what was happening. They come from China, and I have the greatest respect for my Chinese students, because they're leaving the comfort of their homes. They're coming to a place where they, in order to pass the Gaokao, they had to know English, but that doesn't mean they've had rich English conversations with people, right? Maybe if they were lucky, their school had an English corner, and they were able to practice with somebody. But most of their spoken English has been with each other, and so it's hard to be thrust in this very dynamic educational environment where you're having to talk all the time, and I really feel for them. But what was happening is they were coming, sitting in the corner, and tuning out. A lot of my work in my classes is online, so they would do it at their leisure, but they would tune out of the lectures, and they were really engaging the people. And it was hurting me, because I know that they can use their American education as a differentiator.
Right.
They go back and they realize that, okay, they got a master's degree and they got the certificates, but there's a lot of competition for jobs in China.
Yeah.
How do they set themselves apart? And a lot of companies will go, oh, wow, you went to America and you studied there. We're looking at developing stronger ties with America. What contacts did you make there? And they didn't have any, because they sat in the corner with their laptop. So I compelled them to, just a little bit of how I structure the class to make contacts. And so when they go back to China, they can reach out to Americans in business here that they can leverage.
Now, do most of the students plan on going back to China immediately, or it's been my experience that a lot of them want to stay and work here?
Yes, some do stay. They're allowed to have an internship and a 1 year what they call optional training. That's 1 year long. A lot of them though are in their junior year, so they go back and take their senior year, and then they look at coming back for their master's degree. I've had a lot of students come back for their master's degree after they've been through this program, because they understand now the Western lifestyle and the Western way of education.
Yeah. One of the things, so my father obviously taught a lot of students over his career as a professor. And he still keeps in touch with a lot of his students, like you've done on your Facebook. How many of the former students, like from 10 years ago, who are now back in China, are you still connected with them, where you can now start talking to them about business opportunities and collaborating and working together?
Yes, I'm very active on WeChat. I'm probably more active on WeChat than I am Facebook, it seems. But I'm always talking to my students. My students share their victories with me and other successes. And I see the marriages and births of children. And, I feel like I'm a part of the family.
Yeah.
And so they know that if they have a question, they can always write me. And a lot of times they'll have, business questions I'll have answer. But a lot of times they follow their dreams, which is the most important thing of all. They follow their dreams, and they felt like at some extent I've empowered them to do so. And that's really the most exciting and most rewarding messages I get on WeChat, is when someone says, you inspired me to do something that they normally weren't going to do.
Right. Let's talk a little bit about your leadership course and the Chinese students in that. So I'm assuming that in that course, a lot of times people have to get on stage and present something. Is that?
No.
They don't?
No, that's your conventional leadership class, right?
Okay.
But I feel like in all the other courses that they take, they have plenty of opportunities to do presentations.
Okay.
And what I want them is, I'm taking my students on a transformational experience.
Okay.
Because leadership, most of the leadership classes I've taken, I don't know about you, you go in, you learn somebody's style of leadership, and you learn how to hold a meeting. And I'm pretty meeting adverse, but you learn how to hold meetings and how to counsel employees and give them positive and negative feedback. That's not really leadership. That's managership. Maintaining the status quo. I want them to understand who they are first, because if you don't know what your strengths are, if you don't have a grasp of what your own innate leadership style is, how can you leverage that for your own success? So what I teach are things that I think you teach. I teach, communication. I teach understanding culture. I teach empowerment. I teach being an authentic leader, right? How to stay away from biases. And so I take them on this transformational journey where they have to learn their leadership style, and they learn what their Myers-Briggs typology is. What is their personality? And they have to conduct a SWOT analysis: strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats on themselves. And what they do is they learn about themselves. And then they put together their own leadership plan for the next 2 to 5 years about what they're going to do next, what are going to be their goals, what will be the milestones, how will they know this, they've reached success. And that is really what I want to teach. Because if you can do that with yourself, you can do that with a team, you can do that with a company.
So how the mentality of leadership in China, obviously with the very traditional hierarchical state-owned enterprise command mentality where leaders just basically tell their subordinates what to do, it's a very hierarchical organization, and the leadership that you're teaching is how do you lead in a flatter organization?
Right.
How do you lead when people don't actually report to you? What's the difference in the way that the Chinese actually respond to that type of leadership?
They are understanding that China is changing. There is a new China, and the next 2 to 5 years, China is going to go away from, well, I hope it will, go away from this being the manufacturer for the world, and they're going to be the innovators. And you're seeing this in Shenzhen and places in China where companies are developing new products and new services and very innovative things that even the West is starting to copy. And so the companies that are innovators, they can't rely on the typical hierarchical structure. They're going to have to be flat because that's what drives creativity. And I feel like that in a small way that my classes are training the next leaders of China to understand how to navigate that type of environment.
Yeah, no, that's perfect, because obviously it's easier for young people to accept new paradigms.
Right.
And when you're students and you're not fixed in your ways, and you understand the trend of China's ascension on the global stage and being a global leader in a lot of areas, then obviously you want to learn global leadership qualities, whether it's soft skills or whatever, or even having a higher EQ or whatever. That's great for the younger generation. What is your experience with kind of older Chinese business people?
Typically, they're locked in. The old style of leadership got them to where they are today.
All right.
And so they're a little bit risk adverse at looking at other ways. Now there are I've talked to a lot of leaders that have realized themselves that things have got to change if they're going to get to that next level. And I really respect them. But there's still a lot of them that are like, my old way has gotten me here, and this is what's going to keep me here. And so I understand that. That's perfectly valid. But as things begin to change in China, and everything is changing in China, it's just an incredible success story in China right now. More and more leaders need to be able to have an adaptive style and be able to draw on the experience and the strengths of their people. And to do that requires a different kind of leadership, an empowerment that may not have existed in China 10 or 15 years ago.
Yeah, so is there a solution or anything that the university is doing, or you personally that's helping not the new leaders of the future, which obviously you're doing through education, but the current leaders, like the ones in their 50s or 40s that aren't going back to school, but they need to also adapt to a changing geopolitical landscape?
This is a great opportunity for me, Gene, if I can somehow reach those leaders. And right now, like you said, they don't go to school, so they're not going to magically appear in my classroom. I know I need to go to them, and I hope I have the opportunity to do so. But I think a lot of these leaders that are actually looking for a new way, I think we have a good solution. It's like I tell my students, treat their time in America like a cafeteria. Find the things that are good and take back with you and adapt them to the Chinese culture. Everything has to be adapted to culture. Culture drives everything. I say in my class, culture eats strategy for breakfast, right? You got to make sure that everything fits the culture. But take what you can from the American experience, bring it back to China, adapt it to the culture, and see what you can do with it.
I think this is something that we can talk about offline, about some of those opportunities in China, and there are a lot. So we'll talk about that. How is your Chinese now?
Oh, my language?
Yeah.
It is a work in progress, my friend. Every time I speak Chinese to my students, they immediately convert to English because it's probably painful to them. The tonal aspect of the language has been difficult, but this fall I'm going to a little bit more of an intensive training, and my goal is I'm going to be fluent in 2 years.
Oh, okay.
Now hold me accountable to that. In 2 years, have me back on your show, and I'll see if I can speak passable Chinese.
Well, we can actually do the show in Chinese next time if you want.
Fantastic. That may delay the next time I see you. And, hope you have a good holidays.
Yeah. No, but that's definitely something that I think is worth exploring. So I think you've touched on a lot of needs that China needs. They need global leaders. They need people who don't think so traditionally.
Right.
There actually are a significant percentage of Chinese leaders, I'm just talking about anywhere from 30 to 50, even 60 years old, who actually do recognize this need. And the reason that I know this is because Hong Kong University offers kind of this, it's a certificate program, but it's like a 15-month program where Chinese executives register. It's almost like an executive MBA, but it's not accredited as an MBA.
Right.
And it's really, really popular. And either their local companies pay for the students to go, or they just pay out of their own pocket because they recognize the need to actually develop these kind of global leadership skills. The things that you're talking about, there are modules for that. And I'm sure the way that you do it would be really attractive to a large audience in China. So,
but in some way, if you think about it, Gene, this is also a problem. Because we have Chinese leaders trying to learn the American way. Why aren't American leaders learning the Chinese way? There is a lot that goes on in China. The Chinese mindset, the Chinese way of doing business, there's a lot that we can learn in America. I mean, you got to love a country that's got a tomb sweeping day, right?
Yeah. So,
we there's a lot of the Chinese culture that we can bring into our own enterprises here.
Well, I look at everything as, instead of looking at it as a problem, I look at it as an opportunity. So I think another way of saying what you're saying is there's an opportunity for even more global business between America and China.
Exactly.
It's already the two largest economies. They're already doing a lot of business together, but there's always opportunities for more. But there's opportunities not just at the country level or the macro level, but there's opportunities for leaders at the individual level if they understand how to navigate the other culture.
We need to put Chinese leaders and American leaders together. Not so much the CEOs, because they always talk, but middle-level managers, middle-level leaders, get them together so they can understand each other better and learn from each other.
Right.
Political trade winds and such, those things are always going to be there. But let's get people together and get them talking.
Well, that's obviously also kind of like at a macro level. I'm just saying that the thing that you just pointed out, Chinese people are very aggressive in learning how to do business outside of China. Chinese people are really proactive in developing their global or more Western style leadership abilities and skills. And the question that you just asked, American leaders should also be more proactively improving their understanding of how to do business in
Right.
China. And that's actually the opportunity that I'm doing.
Or one more step
Yeah.
is learn how to take success stories and aspects of Chinese culture and learn how to apply it in America because it works.
It does.
This is just human dynamics we're talking about. And there's a lot of things in China that would actually work and better things here in America.
I think the most common example of that is, the 1,000-year-old art of war.
Yes.
Right. So the art of war now has been translated not just into English, but it's been translated and repurposed into art of war for sales, art of war for strategy, and a lot of business leaders now will read the art of war and see how they can apply it to, beating their competitors. Right. Because everything's is kind of like a competitive landscape, and the art of war strategies really work. It's just interesting. I did my negotiations mindset for China business webinar yesterday, and we talked about the art of war. And in negotiations, when you're negotiating with Chinese people, they don't employ art of war tactics because they've learned them, but they employ art of war tactics because it's embedded in their culture.
Right.
That's just how they think and how they behave. So as a foreigner, if you don't really understand how that mindset works, then you just create a lot of disadvantages for yourself.
I agree. Yeah. So like you said, there's a great opportunity, and I think there's a lot I've fallen in love with in the Chinese culture that I really appreciate, and I'd like to kind of see, Americans adopt to a certain extent. Yeah.
So as we wrap this up, let's wrap this up by a couple things. Why don't you share with our audience? So what's next for Michael as far as China business? What's next for you over the next 5 to 10 years?
Well, I'm actively building my platform in China. So I have a very active Weibo platform, thousands and thousands of followers. I'm venturing more and more into WeChat. I want to be a voice in China that's trusted, that represents, not just America, but represents my belief in the new style of Chinese leadership and where China's going as a country. I want to travel more in China, meet more people, find out what kind of value I can provide to companies and to people, and to check in with my students to see how they're doing. But I think if you're in China, you're going to see me a lot more often.
All right, and why don't you leave our audience? You've obviously made a lot of tremendous strides that most Americans can't make as far as building relationships with Chinese, communicating effectively, developing Guanxi relationships. I mean, the fact that you have not had one single contentious discussion with any of your students, I think is
any of my Chinese students.
Any of your Chinese students is
the Americans, on the other hand.
Yeah, is quite phenomenal. So, what's kind of, if you just gave like one general tip or advice for people who are doing business in China, kind of what would you suggest that they really focus on to
do your homework?
Okay.
Don't just understand the business environment, understand the cultural environment. You got to do more to prepare than eat at Panda Express, right? You got to get into some books, meet people, find out what the culture's all about. It's famous in China of having American tourists show up on a tour bus, stay at their American hotel, eat the American menu, and have an American tour guide take them around town. They've left China. What do they see? What do they really experience? Right. So you got to take that one extra step to understand the culture. Go a couple of days early before your meeting. Meet people, right? Read. There's a lot of great books out there about Chinese culture.
Okay.
If you have to, read A Journey to the West.
Yeah.
So.
Okay. Well, that's all. That's all great insights. I just want to thank you for coming. I know you drove a long way from Palm Springs to get here. This was a very, very delightful conversation. I think we all learned a lot about how we can build more bridges to communicate effectively with Chinese people.
Thank you. I enjoyed being here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mike.
All right.